Hello, everyone. So, some of you may not be aware of how I entered the world of entrepreneurship. Well, frankly, it was a bit of a surprise to me, too, that I was geared for this life as an entrepreneur, because actually, more of an accident. So, here's the story. My first career could not have been further away from the world of business. I was, as some of you may know, a professional contemporary dancer and choreographer, which actually meant that I earned very, very little money. I was also a part time waitress, and I still lived at home with my mom because I could not afford rent. I happened to also be studying for my law degree part time. So I was dancing full time, waitressing part time, studying part time, and then all of a sudden I completed my law degree. It was a bit of a shock because now I could no longer justify living with my mom. I was like 28 years old. And then I realized, shit, I really did not want to be a lawyer. I mean, I was glad to have completed the degree. I mean, a completed degree is better than an incomplete one. But man, I just could not face the idea of becoming a lawyer as my profession. But I was also at a bit of a crossroads with my dance career. I was broke. I was constantly injured. It was really, really hard to make a living as a dancer, and I was not getting any younger. So sadly, the professional lifespan in dance is pretty limited. So I decided to try something radical. I decided to get an office job, which I managed to do quickly. I got a job as a database manager in a recruitment company, which meant that I had this pile of CVs on my desk when I arrived at work every morning, and it was my job to phone people and update their details. So very soon I rose in the ranks. I became a fully fledged consultant, and within a couple of years, I was doing really well in the company. But internally, I was really struggling with reporting to someone else, with having to do things according to the rules set by others, particularly when I thought my ideas were so much better. God, I was an arrogant little shit. Anyway, one thing led to another, and I decided I was going to set up my own firm. Wow, just what guts and gumption I had. I really knew nothing about running a business, being an entrepreneur. But I had a lot of self belief, and I loved the idea of using my creativity to build something. And I guess creativity and tenacity and determination and discipline and waking up every day with love in your heart for the thing that you're showing up for, those really are the common denominators with being an artist and an entrepreneur. Anyway, it has been 23 years. I've never looked back. Not once have I ever been tempted to throw in the towel, despite the many, many challenges and curveballs and detours and low moments over the past 2 decades. Because here's the thing, being an entrepreneur is tough, particularly right now in the current markets, and particularly if you're looking for investment capital at any stage of the game, whether it's your first bit of angel money or pre-seed money, or if you're raising your A, B, C round, whatever, money is not flowing the way that it was a couple of years ago. And then I always wonder what's going on in the mind of investors when they decide to invest cash in startup founders who, like probably many of them, entrepreneurs that is, if this is their first rodeo, are kind of clueless about things, just as I was when I decided to go out on my own way back. So I'm super curious to know what is the X factor that makes them confident enough to invest? What are the deciding factors? So that's why I'm really excited about my guest today. We'll get into that in a bit in the formal, informal part of today's episode of On Work and Revolution. Roll music. Welcome to On Work and Revolution, where we talk about what's shaking up in the world of work and Edtech. I'm your host, Debbie Goodman, and I'm the CEO of Jackhammer Global, a global group of executive search and leadership coaching companies. I'm also an advisor to venture-backed EdTech founders. And for those of you in the EdTech sector who are hiring, we have launched a fractional leaders offering. That's my shameless punch. And I'll put the link in the show notes. My main mission with all of my work is to help companies and leaders to create amazing workplaces where people and ideas flourish, which is why I'm so excited today to be joined by my guest, Jessica Millstone, who I feel I've been stalking at the various EdTech conferences for the past year or so. Finally, we realized that there'd been some kind of weird email glitch, and so our emails weren't getting to each other. And then finally, we're here. So quick intro. Jessica is a venture and angel investor in women-led pre-seed tech companies in the future of learning and workspace. She's been working in the edtech sector in one form or another, helped grow companies like BrainPop before deciding to enter the world of investing. And today we're going to be talking about the opportunities that are arising for founders and investors if they're willing to adapt at what seems like an incredibly challenging time in the venture world. So, welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for stalking me down because I have truly enjoyed, now that we are connected to each other, to have many conversations about this space.
Great. Okay. So I have so many questions before we even get into the current state of the investing landscape. Firstly, what prompted you to leave the operator world and cross over to the dark side, to the other side, and become an investor?
Well, I will say, just as a baseline, like personality trait, I do like to reinvent myself every once in a while. So, I have now, in retrospect, looked through my career in ed tech and seen these very clear delineations between the instructional side of my career, the product development and sort of operational side of my career, and now I'm in the investing side. But probably in the moments, they were a little bit more based on circumstance and just like ready to do something new in this world and in this space. And I've had the great privilege to have like a deep and wide career in education where I've been able to go very deep into some areas, specifically around technology integration and the development of technologies for teaching and learning, but then also be able to apply those across so many different aspects. As part of my work in ed tech, I'm a big believer in community building and gathering and bringing the people together as much as possible. Like you said in your introduction of yourself, like to have these great workplaces and um, you know a- uh, areas where people can like really collaborate and grow together. That's always been one of my missions. And here in New York, I run the New York EdTech Meetup, which is a now almost 9,500 membership community of EdTech educators and operators and investors. And that's where I really got to meet the investor side of the EdTech space. We had a number of great sponsors and contributors to our meetup, including GSV Ventures, Cooley, Goodwin Proctor legal firms, people who really worked on the investment side of building those businesses, and I got a little taste of it from working with them. One of my co-organizers is a woman named Michelle Dervin, who was a venture partner a partner at Rethink Education and is now a venture partner there, and has her own startup as well in the edtech space. I've gotten to see it from. I have a number of mentors that really sort of guided me towards investing and helped illuminate like what is the level of influence that you can have on the trajectory of these companies from that side of the table. So that was really appealing as well.
Wow. Okay. So now it it makes sense as to why you seem to be the most well networked person in the in the entire ed tech community.
It's true because I create the network. That's how I do it. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so now just for listener purposes, can you just clarify the difference between angel investing and venture capital? Because it seems like it's all morphs into the same thing, but they are quite distinct.
They are, and it's something that I really try to illuminate for the founders that I work with. I think that venture capital, whether angel investing and venture capital are equally kind of a black box for founders. They're like, no, they're supposed to raise VC, but they're not really sure what that means or what are the implications of it. And really, the difference is an angel investor is investing out of their own pocket. So they are perhaps an exited in the edtech space. Maybe they exited their edtech company and they have some discretionary income that they would like to use to help other founders, other entrepreneurs like themselves, start up and contribute both some startup funding, but then also expertise and support, operational support in some way. A venture capital, a VC, a venture capitalist or a venture capital fund is a fund that actually has its own investors that have come in. So it's not really the discretion of the general partner or managing director of that fund as much as it is them having to go back to their own investors and decide collaboratively what investments to make. And usually you go in with an understanding from your investors, which are called LPs, that there's either some or none contribution they might make. Maybe there's an investment committee, maybe there's some more casual communications. But essentially, you are managing the money of others. And there's a fiduciary responsibility involved with that that is not true of an angel investor. So generally, when I talk to founders, I try to be able to really like seed them with some questions that they can ask a potential investor that can get to like who is making this investment. Is it you personally? Are you doing it on behalf of somebody? What are the expectations that you have for the return on this investment? Is it that you really love investing your time and energy into the ecosystem, and if there's a little capital that goes along with it, all the better? Or are you managing funds for a very serious LP, and you need to return those funds to a multiple of 5, 10, at what's been put in? So it's a very different investment decision that happens whether you're VC or angel.
Okay, so then I just want to continue with that line of thought because when we spoke a little while ago, you were chatting about the misalignments that can sometimes arise between investors and founders, and in fact, how sometimes the venture model can actually be quite destructive or completely not aligned with the trajectory, growth plans, etc., of the founder. In the meantime, you've got this founder who is just desperate for any cash and will take it wherever it comes. It may sound like an angel investor is an easier target because it's more discretionary, but venture is usually bigger sums of. Anyway, there's a lot at stake here. But let's dig into what are those misalignments that founders should be aware of before they accept any cash.
Yeah. Well, this is really a learning process of my own. I mean, I consider the investing space to be like an experiential learning platform in many ways. Like it's really necessary to be doing it to understand how it works. And one of the things I learned along the way is sort of like what. So let's just start with the benefits of venture capital. Like the ideal of venture capital is that you have a front loaded amount of money that you can use to seriously scale the size of your business. And when I think about what the misalignments might be to that, is that the expectation of the return on that investment being historically the ideal return is a 10x return. Amount of money that is being put in, the not only just the size of the expectation of the size of the return on investment, but actually the time frame that that needs to happen within is predetermined by the venture capital model of the fund structure with the outside investors who are being guaranteed a return on their investment in within 10 years. So once a founder takes venture capital, they're on a clock, a very fast ticking clock of how are they going to scale to become that billion-dollar company that the investor has promised back to their own backers. And so that's sort of like, and when and then when you couch all this within the education space, and you think about those timelines, a 10-year timeline of the creation of a technology, the adoption by the stakeholders, including teachers, students, parents, administrators that have to understand the value of it, actually paying for it, getting the contracts done, and getting within the school, having some usage, being able to see, and then like ultimately being able to see learning outcomes. That's a much longer timeline than 10 years. Even with a very fast moving technology like AI in education, or even some of the technologies we've seen in the past, they have had fast adoption, but fast is not the same fast as a venture capital model. So when you take this money, this front loaded, and typically venture capital, like you were saying, it's a much larger check size. That can also be quite detrimental to an early stage startup that doesn't have the high growth model sort of built into it. Education in its slow implementation and in its adherence to efficacy and learning outcomes doesn't have the same kind of, very fast,
Massive trajectory.
massive trajectory, high growth trajectory. It can't absorb that much money. It actually can't absorb the kind of growth that would be necessary to scale the same way an enterprise SaaS software company could.
So I have a question. Around that, because venture money typically has got this expectation regarding the multiple X's. That's the point of it. And unless an investment has the possibility of that, why invest at all? And they've got accountability to their LPs, and that's the mandate. But in the edtech space right now, what we're seeing is that the likelihood of that type of growth is actually a little more muted, a little more realistic, a little more, okay, we've adjusted to the post COVID realities. And is the venture model still aligned with the way in which edtech companies, for the most part, are likely to grow?
Well, I will say that even in my short time, my 4 years of venture investing, being in this space, there has been a real evolution of like what is the venture model. So we're actually seeing a lot more diversity of fund structures and ways in which the investors are imagining the trajectory of their funds and the expectations and the promises they're you know building into raising their funds. Um, there are absolutely in the education space those unicorns. Like there's actually been a sort of like pulling back of that word unicorn,
Yeah.
of course. Just on its 10-year anniversary now, Aileen Lee has written a new report and talked a little bit about how a lot of those are papercorns, or I think she had another word for it too that was not as complimentary. But there are really those companies that break out of the pack and have that kind of both consumer and enterprise level success and eventually IPO and go public. The long term viability of those on the market is still TBD. We've seen some real pullback of some of those publicly traded ed tech companies, but for the most part, there are some that will happen too, and they're the kind of rare like star that like bursts onto the scene. At the same time, as you said, like there are these more slow growing companies that have real sustainability, real profitability. I mean, the education space is truly a multi-trillion-dollar market, and there's a lot. I mean, there's just a constant, refreshing of audience. Within the market, there's always new students, there's always new families, there's always new people to be using, and teaching and learning is obviously not going anywhere. So there's a lot of stability and profitability in the space, and so I think the venture investors have been very smart in the ways that I should say, have adapted to the realities of the education market and trying to like fit in, curate models that work for both the venture side of it and the education side of it.
Yeah, I heard you speak about this, the Transcend Network webinar a few weeks ago, just around the alternative models. And we don't need to repeat that here. Anybody who's listening and who's interested, go find that, a recording of that. It's super, super interesting regarding the alternatives. But we know that raising capital right now is really hard. And so what does this mean for a founder who's still of the mindset that either they raise angel or venture capital or they're out, die?
I mean, the bootstrap model has always worked for companies since the beginning of time. I was actually just in London at BET, and I did a quick fireside chat with another angel investor turned VC, who really had I think, a really good idea of a model that many, I think, startup founders should look at, which is that you are going to raise capital. Like you're not going to be able to fully bootstrap. You are going to have to be out there raising, but think of it as one round. Maybe that round is over many years of time, but you can tranche it. You can create incentives to come in earlier at lower valuations, and as you become revenue positive, you become profitable, you have the traction that you need to really prove out the value, the product market fit of what you're building. Then you can raise your valuation along the way, but not think of it as like, I'm going to go out and like front load, $2.5 million and then spend it all, and then I'm going to raise more money, and then I'm going to spend it all. But rather think about it as a continuous growth period of your company, and how will you finance it along the way, through a combination of angels and venture investors. And as you move up that tranche, as your valuation increases, then you can start to look for more and more professional institutional investors who can see the value in what you're building and be able to be immediately responsive to it with capital.
Do you have sort of a window of insight into what's happening into some of the sort of the accelerator venture studio, like really early stage? Because I think in the past few years there was a just such a view that the obvious thing was you're going to have an idea and then you're going to raise some money, and that's just the way it works. And so for many founders or people who thought, oh, this is a problem to solve, this is how it's going to work for me too, to adjust the mindset and to go, actually, there's that was that was one way, and it's largely not going to it's largely not going to be my future destiny based on where the markets are now. Is that sort of like learning or rethinking starting to starting to sort of arise in the very very early stages when it comes to founders with the idea who they need to get it to market?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's two things happening kind of simultaneously. One is that it has never been easier to start a company and run it on a very small, sort of lean startup model than ever before. I mean, certainly if you're leveraging AI, you're leveraging all kinds of tools and platforms and technologies to build the product that you make, but also build out the business model and be able to find your customers and have that be a viable entity in the market, viable product in the market. It's never been easier to do that on a shoestring. So that's happening. And then there's also a model around collaboration. And, as you mentioned at the beginning of your introduction, like you're working on a fractional, um, helping people like sort of build out their teams fractionally. And just that model, that trend, I see happening in the education space specifically. I've actually just in the last couple of weeks met so many people who are trying to help these lean startups, these like, as one investor called it, micro companies in the Edtech space, be able to like build out their teams in a balloon and deflate capacity, and then also band together into these venture studios. And the accelerator programs have been ongoing for a while. I think the big brand ones, YC and Techstars have always had great education edtech sort of companies come through them, but there's also all kinds of really specialized ones that are more geared towards social impact companies, people working with in a particular space like education, where it's harder to get in, but it has more impact societally in the long term, and there's value around that can be established and communicated. And so there's this combination of like really small companies sort of banding together into these venture studio or under the heading or under the auspice of a fractional leadership kind of model. And really collaborating, working together, and like and all these people sort of disparately coming together and like having a shared purpose for a very particular audience.
Right. I think there has been sort of a status attached to, oh, well, I've just raised and now I'm going to market. And there was, I think, just the change landscape. If people are willing to adapt and actually reconsider the way in which you grow a company, which actually it's kind of new that as somebody with just an idea would be able to raise money and then hire a bunch of people full time and not necessarily even have revenue or any sight of profitability and then be able to raise more money. I mean, that's kind of insane if you think about it.
It really is. And I come from a family business that my grandfather started in the 40s. And I can assure you that that was never the model that anybody worked on, prior to, the last 10
Yeah.
years or so. Or it really, of course, venture's been around for a long time and it had a very specific purpose. I mean, the history of venture capital is quite fascinating in the sense that, it really was established to create these hardware companies. And we're kind of back in a phase of this too, where like there's a lot being invested into deep tech and chips and semiconductors and hardware. And like that's really driving a lot of the innovation in our space. And that's the way it was 50 years ago in Silicon Valley, the actual, creation of the silicon chips. And you needed that money to front load. Like you absolutely needed that money in order to get it off the ground and have very favorable terms to the investors to get paid back for it. And now that's been applied so widely. I mean, I've seen fitness instructors who have a VC model where they, get investors for their influencers. It's very similar. in the creator economy. Like it's been applied so widely now. And I think are in a moment of sort of picking and choosing, like what are the actual benefits or detractions, like to using this kind of capital. To your point about raising all this money and scaling so quickly, I mean, I have a number of female founders in my portfolio who have had extremely bad experiences of doing exactly that and really wish they didn't have that much money going into it. Sometimes if you have the opportunity to build slowly and more focused on product market fit from the very beginning, it's a more rewarding experience, I think, than the stress and um, I think ultimately sometimes mostly failure that comes along with a rapid scaling of a high growth business.
Well, I'm case in point. I have started and grown and closed many businesses, and never really had to do the capital raise, and always bootstrapped. And when things fail, they're my failures, and I don't have to answer to anybody. When they grow, it's slow growth, but yeah, it's
But you have the ownership. You keep the ownership piece of it as well.
that too. And so sometimes I wonder if I had raised capital, if it would have been faster growth. But there's that stress factor that I really can make decisions together with my colleagues and partners within the company, and really turn that around very, very quickly in response to changing external factors, which I really do prize highly together with my independence. That's not for everybody, and some companies really do need the injection of capital in order to grow. I wanted to just pick up on the women-led bit, because I heard you say you're doubling down on that in the previous webinar I'd alluded to. And so tell me what, I mean, of course, I think that's a brilliant strategy, but why?
Well, I mean, first of all, I started this fund 4 years ago based on a statistic that had been published about how women-led tech companies only get 2% of all the venture capital that's available out there. And in the intervening 4 years, that number has gone down. That has actually decreased over the time that we have seen some of the biggest boom and bust in venture capital investments across all sectors. And I don't think that women are participating equally in any of that. And that's a huge motivator for me, is to, based on my own personal history and also, the work that I've done over many years in education, I really see this happen over and over again. Like in education specifically, it's mostly women who do the work in educational environments, but it's still mostly men that start the companies and have the big exits. And actually, to the exit point, we know from research, from the data actually, that women have better exits. They build more sustainable companies that have higher value and valuations, and exit quicker than men do, for the most part. I think that there's actually quite a bit in the women's leadership model that we could use as a culture and a society to improve the tech world overall. And I just want to be more a part of that than ever.
Well, thank you for that. We could have a whole other discussion all on that alone, but
That will be part two, because it is actually a big part of this year for me, is to actually not only invest in more women through my angel investing practice, but also to help women angel investors go level up into becoming LPs and funds, and extending the influence and the leadership qualities, their values and leadership qualities into those environments as well.
well, that is a perfect segue into my last question around what are you most excited about for Copperwire Ventures, your company, for your portfolio companies, for the Edtech space in 2024? What's up?
That's so great. So Copperwire Ventures specifically, I'm in a moment of real portfolio support for those companies. I'm not actively making new investments out of the fund. We've really locked it actually towards the end of 2022, locked the fund as a way to either do some bridge capital, some follow-on investments within the portfolio, but really focus time and energy on helping those companies achieve their next big milestone. So for like the very first check that I wrote out of Copperwire Ventures, for example, they're going out on their seed round this year. It's a company, adolescent mental health company, that won the GSV Cup at ASU GSV last year, and on the strength of that, raised a very healthy pre-seed round. Now going out for their seed round, Q1 or 2 this year. So there's those kinds of milestones. And then I have some companies who are either hitting their Series A or really thinking about their exit. Like, what is going to be the next phase of their company? And maybe that's as part of the product roadmap of a big edtech, a K-12 edtech company, or a media company acquisition for what they're building. So there's like a number of companies at that stage as well. And so to support those portfolio companies, I'm doing a little bit of work in the M&A cultivation space, like helping make some network some of those companies to the potential acquirers, but also help the acquirers understand who's out there in the early stage space that they might be using to buy, not build innovation within their company. So that's been really fascinating to me. I do a lot of this work with the Transcend Network, with Alberto and Michael from Transcend Network. We're really like I consider them real thought partners on building out that phase of Copperwire Ventures specifically. And then, as I mentioned, I'm doing much more work advocating in the women investor space. So I already do a lot of networking and community building within the family office and social impact fund space, helping people who are really interested in directing allocations that they may have towards philanthropic contributions and thinking about how they could do that very same work, but investing in for-profit companies. So I've done that all along, but I really am working very specifically now around that sort of level up between angel investor and LP.
Well, that sounds like a lot. And all very exciting. I am sure we will. I definitely want to do part two. We'll do. We'll find
Yeah,
another time for
let's check in.
We'll check in.
You'll be my accountability partner that I actually achieve any of these things.
Okay.
Because as I said, I'm always out reinventing myself. So a little bit of it is build it and they will come.
Right.
But I love checking back in and
Great.
hearing about what you're up to.
We will do that, or I will see you at another EdTech conference, I'm sure. So thank you so much, Jessica. This has been fabulous as always. Speak to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for hanging around all the way to the end. It would mean the world if you would rate and review on Work and Revolution on your favorite listening app. It helps people know that the show is worth listening to, and so I'll really appreciate that. Thank you so much.